Welcome to Chapter 3 of my BUSA USA 1/4 scale SPAD 13 build. This has been a 2-year project at this point, and I've enjoyed it, but I'm also spending a lot of time on making modifications and hopefully improvements to the kit. These were outlined in previous video that I did. These are just a collection of still shots. This first one here is basically the landing gear modifications that I attempted to make, trying to emulate the full-scale SPAD 13 type of suspension. And it's in its rough form, as you can see, using rubber bands, etc. But you will shortly see the actual operation of it.
Suspension action, just like the original SPAD. Of course, rubber bands are replaced with bungee cords. A little cleaning up here. All in all, pretty pleased.
As you can see, it functions fairly well, and I'm quite pleased with it. There is some cleanup, obviously, of the landing gear, but overall, very pleased with it, and I think I'm going to be very satisfied with the outcome. There will be some covers going over it, as per some of the models of the SPAD. What I did notice in looking at my research on the SPAD was there was numerous different variances, I guess, in the way the landing gear was put together, fared in, or whatever the case may be. So I'm going to go with something that I've kind of liked for myself personally. What we're looking at here is just a little bit of the details. Because of the music wire and the placement of it, it was a little more difficult to get the actuation to work smoothly, but after a while it did come around, and overall pretty pleased with it. Shot of the attachment points to the center section of the bottom wing, and then a view of the actual axle with the pivot point and basically where the wheel will be. These are just basically brass pipe that I put on the end of the music wire. At this point, we're looking at the interplane struts, jury struts, and the cabane struts, basically the balsa fairings that were installed as per plans. I hope to improve these with some sort of a covering on there so it's not so apparent. Not sure what this form will actually take, but at any rate, I hope to come up with something that would be a little more scale, like I guess is the word I'm looking for. At this point, it was time to move ahead and start putting the front formers on and start giving the square box a little bit of shape. So the formers were punched out and attached, and then started putting the stringers that would give it the top deck, the front top deck, the shape they were looking for. This is also the next procedure is going to be the installation of the gun troughs, which involves some very fine 1/32 plywood that had to be shaped to fit inside the formers. It was a fairly sharp radius turn, and I found that it was much better to pre-soak the plywood for a short period of time in some hot water, which gave it a little more flexibility before it was clamped or glued and clamped in place. Then after an overnight drying, basically trimming them off, sanding them down to fit the shape, and the finished product came out reasonably well. I was very happy with it, actually to the point where I said, well, we might as well put the Vickers machine guns in and see exactly what they are going to look like at the end of the day. So dug those out and put them in place, as you can see, and the overall effect was pretty pleasing. I think they're going to be quite noticeable when the airframe is done. A couple other views that I took of them. When it comes time to put them in place, there's a few modifications I have to make, because part of the decking is going to be hiding the back part of the machine gun, and some of the scale stuff will have to be trimmed off, but you're not going to see it because it's underneath and buried away. But I just hate to take anything apart that I've already made. At this point, I've decided that maybe this is the time to start putting the radio gear in place before I close the fuselage up too much. So I dug out the instruments that I purchased from iFly Tailies, and basically this is a First World War supposedly scale instruments. They came black, as you can see. I decided I'd spray them silver, which is what in any of my documentation that I noticed most of the instruments were silver. Also, it was a wooden interior, and it was looked like what I've done here with a little bit of stain to give it a little bit of a color. The instruments were fairly straightforward. Any of the brass things you see there were handmade of stuff I had in my shop, and you know, surprising what you can come up with that's going to make it look well. You'll notice in the center, just above the clock, is the switch. This is the receiver switch plus the battery charge. I wanted to have everything where it was accessible, but not 100. Here you can see the rear fuselage with the stringers now in place, and of course that is really giving the shape to the fuselage, so you can actually start to see what the finished outcome is going to be like. The next picture is going to show the engine instruments, and you can see the radio switch and the engine master and charge port just below the switch, and the black is going to have a light bulb into it, that LED light, so I can know when the engine is armed. At this point, it was now time to start closing up the front end of the fuselage and start looking at placement of where the radio gear was going to go, how it was going to be made accessible, and all those things that are nice to have done before you finish building the airplane, where it's almost impossible to get into it. So this is what I'm doing now, just trial fitting some of the tail fin and looking at where the radio placement may be. Also, I started working on the fairing in of the tail feathers. This was recommended to have this done before the tail fin is attached. So as you see, there's a fair amount. There's two very large blocks, basically about a quarter of them left, if that, after they were finally tuned in. This also involved some braces that had to go on the front that were going to support the chin cowl, the bottom chin cowl. They had to be put on and basically put the fuselage on in to make sure that they were nice and flat when they were installed. And as you can see, they came out fairly well. So that basically tidied that up, and now it was time to move on to the radio gear. One of the things that I did want to do was to have the wires not visible going from the fuselage up to the top wing where the aileron servos are. So I came up with a brass tube, made up my own leads to go through the brass tube, which is basically a scale representation of the fuel lines from the scales of the original Spad. So that came out fairly well and tested out good. So now I'm basically looking at installing the radio gear, getting it in place, making my radio deck so it's removable. And after I was satisfied with that, it was on to running the rudder. I decided to go with a pull-pull system rather than a push-pull system, which was part of the plans of what they recommended. But I wanted to go as close to scale as I possibly could, and this is a scale setup where the control wires come up through the fuselage, up through the stabilizer, and attached to the top part of the rudder. So it took a little bit of time to get this lined up and figured out, and get the track so it would go exactly the angle I need without, obviously going around a bunch of material of the fuselage, etc. However, I did. There wasn't anything that was rubbing seriously, but I decided to use some nyrod leads to put the cables through, just to hopefully stop that from happening. The elevator control is a simple nyrod setup. So basically, it's a push-pull system, and as you can see, I used a rather heavy-duty one that I had one left over from another project. So basically, it's fairly simple to line that up down through the fuselage, provide the support so it doesn't flex inside the fuselage, and it's a little tight at the tail end where it's going to hook up. But overall, I think it's going to function quite well. It did function quite well, and I'm sure it won't be a problem. This is just a quick view of what it looks like when you're looking down on the servos. That's about it for this chapter. Stay tuned for the next episode, and as they say, more to come. Thank you for watching. Bye.